Supply Chain Talk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
My name's Alistair Charlton, your host, and our topic today is on networking and customer relationships and how to build a better connection. As usual, I'll be discussing with my guests, first of all, a recent news item, and then we'll move on to the main topic. And as always, there's the Q&A panel on the right, so please do add your comments and questions, and we'll be awarding a Supply Chain Talk mug to the contributions that we value most today. Depending how the conversation goes, we may not be able to respond to all your comments, but we'll try to pick up on some of them. So let me bring on my panelists today, and the first of those is Anna Maria Velika, who is the founder of Green Apples Career. Welcome, Anna. And she is an international procurement and supply chain leader. Green Apples Career is a career mentoring hub with a heart and purpose to help the underrepresented professionals address challenges they face in starting and growing their career. Stephen Kravec is Director for Supply Chain and Customer Service at Fresenius Kabi Canada. And Stephen's been working in the supply chain industry for over 15 years with experience in the manufacturing and healthcare industries. And he currently manages the supply chain and customer services teams for Fresenius Kabi Canada, and they produce and market pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So Stephen's therefore really relying on a global supply chain to bring life-saving medications to patients across Canada. And finally, we have Professor Dr. Mamun Habib, who is professor at the Independent University Bangladesh and also professor at the University of Texas. Professor Habib is a professor in the School of Business and Entrepreneurship and also a visiting scientist for the University in Texas, which is in Arlington. And he's adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Business for the University Tun Abdul Razak in Malaysia. In addition to his long academic career, he's involved with supply chain industry research projects. So welcome all three of you. And just in case some of you are wondering, one of our guests, Olga, was not able to make it in the end today. So it's just the three of you. So thank you for joining. So if we move now to our news item, and that is a recent one on the BBC website by Michael Race, one of their business reporters, and it's looking at the surprise jump in UK inflation, which was very much driven by vegetable shortages. So veg shortages drove up inflation for fresh produce and food in particular, and food in turn therefore drove up UK inflation. And in terms of that, it meant that actually it was really rather sort of crucial in that it led to the Bank of England increasing interest rates yet again for the 11th time as a result of those inflation figures. And you know, the rise in food costs really was a big factor there. And some of the goods affected, some examples, I'm sure it varies in many different markets, but in our case, in the UK, it was tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers were among the goods affected because of extreme weather in Spain and North Africa impacting harvests, and also high energy prices hitting growers in the UK. So I think some UK growers just didn't want to grow so much because they really weren't making any money for it. Anyway, the upshot is that sadly, food inflation was pushed up to 18.2% on an annual basis, which is the highest in the UK since 1978. So that's the highest in 45 years, which is really, really tough and really extraordinary. So kind of a recent example, if anyone was needed, of the importance of supply chains and their vulnerability to some of the factors like energy costs. So enough from me explaining the article. Anna, I mean, obviously you're in the UK. You know, kind of, what are some of your thoughts on the factors behind this high rise in food prices in particular?
Yeah, thank you for having me. What I can say from my former remit as a head of supply chain for critical products for baby food and baby milk, if I look back when the pandemic started and now post-pandemic, we are witnessing a very challenging environment. Everything is changing with global external factors, which are independent of us, of the manufacturers, such as the war zones, such as increase in gas prices. So these are the external factors that put a lot of strain on manufacturers. But also, if we look at the UK is prone to inflation to a higher rate. Why is that? An additional external factor is Brexit. So Brexit put a lot of additional pressure on supply chain in terms of manpower, vehicle, the heavy vehicle goods, the VHG, also the shortages in the lead times in terms of bringing the goods into the UK, given the Brexit, given the non agreements with European Union. So it's a lot happening, and we are still witnessing on top the climate, all the changes in the climate, and everything. All these external factors are adding a lot of pressure on the supply chain. And when I look back, availability of critical products such as food and beverages it's very tough to have a job in supply chain when you head up a supply chain for a critical product, given the external factors. So I think the external world and ever-changing environment is contributing to a very difficult supply chain.
Definitely. Thank you, Anna. Stephen, I mean, I guess in Canada you don't at least have Brexit as a problem. Are you seeing food prices also increasing hugely? And what do you think are some of the reasons in your region?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, fuel was the big driver for a while, and it's always surprising to me. Fuel seems to be coming back down, but a lot of the costs that have gone up as a result of higher fuel don't seem to be coming down quite as fast. So that was certainly one. And you talked about staff shortages, I think, Anna Maria, with Brexit. We're still facing that quite significantly in Canada, where just the workforce that was sort of driven out during COVID with some of the slowdown, we're finding they're not so quick to come back to some of the jobs that are required, such as farming and production and things like that. So I think we're still feeling the effects of all of it. I think overall Canada's not inflation hasn't been quite as high as the U.S. and I think the UK, which is promising, but yeah, it's certainly still worrisome.
Thank you.
I think the workforce is a big one for us, trying to get the workforce back and back.
That's really interesting. And Professor Mamoon, I mean, again in Bangladesh and your region, are you seeing high food inflation? And is labor a problem there? I would have thought less of a problem, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you so much. Before coming to the Bangladesh perspective, we like to say one thing is that now is a global village. So if you look very carefully, that all over the world, the economic condition, recession, is a turbulence. When you have this kind of turbulence, you cannot ignore your internal or external factors. So you have to adopt this kind of culture. I just like to start the few things. When the COVID-19 started, supply chain disruption was very common in all over the world. So global supply chain disruption happens due to the COVID. And then almost more than 2 years, the COVID situation was there. And then when the COVID situation was better, that time we are getting this another supply chain disruption for the Russia-Ukraine war. So due to the Russia-Ukraine war, the main issue is the well. So when the fuel issues is there, then automatically the pricing issues will be there. And if you look very carefully, Bangladesh, India, this South Asian region, we are too much connected with the Ukraine. Ukraine is the hub for the food and other things. So unfortunately, we are facing these issues. Inflation is very high. But again, I remind you one thing is that still we are better than other situations, because though inflation is very high, but the people still there believe that it is for temporary stages. Maybe we can get the result within the next 1 or 6 months to 1 year. So they are trying to reduce their buying capacity by themselves, so that at least they can absorb this kind of situation. So that this kind of situation they can try to cope up with the scenario. Though inflation is very high, I said, and even the inflation, the government rate and our perception is different. Government, they like to focus the one way the inflation rate, but unfortunately, when you see the real scenario is more than twice of the inflation. However, still I said that is better. Bangladesh economic condition is better than if you compare the other country. But again, I remind you, the issue is that what you said earlier, the global village, supply chain disruption. So that is the main reason. And I believe that our practitioners, they can also discuss about this issue, how we can come up with some solution, how we can come up with some of the findings from here.
Great, thank you very much, Professor. Might be worth actually, just before we move to our main topic, I think which actually is a bit of a link anyway, is that I'm not sure if the UK, perhaps we have a quick run round on that one. I think the UK supermarket industry is incredibly competitive. The low price retailers, Aldi and Lidl from Germany, have really taken a lot of share. And I think it means that the supermarkets are very, very conscious of prices. So I think the inflation might be driven partly by starting at very low prices. And I think that relates to and there's been comment on it, on the supplier customer relationship, i.e. the retailers as the customer buying from their suppliers, and they drive incredibly fixed low prices for goods, which means, and there's been comment about this, that some of the growers will say, okay, I'll deliver the minimum I need to deliver under my contract. The rest, forget it. I'm not delivering to you because you won't pay me any more, whereas I can export it and get a lot more because people will pay a sensible price. So Anna, I don't know, obviously you're in the UK, I don't know whether you see some of that, but again, it'd be interesting just to hear from the other two as well.
Yeah, so what I can tell you from my experience, the inflation, the cost in the supply chain, such as gas and packaging, which are the main contributors to the cost increase, this has a knock-off effect on the total cost of ownership of a product, yes? So if the cost is increased, the multinational companies, the corporations, all the companies will increase, and unfortunately, some of the cost will be passed on the consumer. Now, before the product is being made available to consumer, there is a negotiation happening, as you very well said, between the company, the manufacturer, and the retailers, such as Asda, Tesco. So Tesco, sometimes they won't agree with the increase in price, which, one example, would end up in lack of availability on the shelf because they don't agree this price increase. But when there is a generic, it's happening everywhere, these the retailers have no choice other than increasing their cost and putting the product on the shelf. But it's more to it, Alistair, and we will cover everything in this call, I hope.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Stephen, I don't know about the relationship between the supermarkets and their suppliers in Canada.
Yeah, I meant to bring this up in my first comment. Listen, the rising costs overall were real, and I think it's only fair that throughout the chain, it unfortunately got passed on to the consumers through the retail setting. However, some of the major grocers in Canada just had to sit in front of a Senate committee, I think, in the U.S. They produced record margins, record revenues over the last 12 months, and I think everybody, listen, we're all sort of business people here, so you have to make profits to invest in your business. But I think when they saw record profits with record inflations, and food's a major driver, they started asking questions. There's a little finger pointing right now, to be honest, about why are the prices still so high. Yeah. Okay,
that's very interesting. Thank you, Stephen. And Professor Mamoon, I don't know, again, in the Bangladesh, India region, whether the supermarkets have a very big influence on the prices they pay to their suppliers.
Yeah, definitely. Things is happening here, but that nowadays, what I said, that even the customers, when they like to purchase the product, they also thinking about this issue, the pricing issues. So the earlier, suppose they are thinking that the branding is a very critical issue for them. Even they like to compromise the branding, so that at least they like to make sure that they have the buying capacity. Within the buying capacity, they are able to purchase. And in that sense, the retailers, they are getting the good profit, no doubt, even during the circumstances during this COVID period. But again, the question is that what you said, that the buying capacity is a very critical issue. And so sometimes they are doing the compromise with the low product. So low prices product, they are preferring better than the quality products. So that's a compromising is happening here. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. So some interesting things there around the kind of, the importance of that supplier customer relationship, which leads us nicely to our main topic. And kind of really, the sort of, I think the comment when we were posting on LinkedIn is that your supply chain is only as good as the relationships that you build across them. And so, it's all around how do you have the best relationships with your trading partners in the supply chain. So the kind of first thing is around, our first point on the agenda is relationship building across a modern supply chain, and that sort of includes communication, collaboration, and transparency changes. I think in the past there's been quite a confrontational relationship between supplier and customer, kind of beating them up on price, service, etc. And I think perhaps there's a more collaborative approach nowadays. I mean, Anna, is that something that you've seen in your world?
In my world, yes. If I take Nestle as an example, they have a best-in-class customer relationship team because, as you said, nowadays there is no longer that confrontation between supply chain, procurement, supply chain, and the customers, because the companies are here to serve the consumers. So there is an integration now happening. And if I look at Nestle, they have joint supply chain plans with customers, with Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury, all the big retailers. Why? And because there is a need more than ever to integrate processes. And I will take an example. The forecast. If the retailer, if the pandemic generated such a high increase in demand, if the processes are well integrated between the manufacturer and the customer, then the agility and the speed to react is very high, because the manufacturer will need to have integrated tools and processes to learn about this inflated demand as soon as possible in order to produce the demand. So I would say Nestle are, and I no longer work for them, but in my remit, I was delighted to see and to represent a company that was doing excellently well in a world of availability by working very closely with and having these joint supply chain plans with the customers.
Great, thank you, Anna. And Stephen, I mean, certainly that's something that is mentioned often in terms of collaboration. That sharing of data, sharing of forecasts, in particular, is that something that you find is a really critical part of collaborative relationships?
Sure, yeah, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You talk about customers. It could really be internal customers, external customers. You're really talking about your stakeholders and how do you make the engine work. And I would say over the last first of all, supply chain doesn't, and to your point, supply chain usually doesn't get so close to the customer, and especially depending where you are in the supply chain, you might not necessarily ever touch that customer. But one thing that COVID did, at least for us being in the healthcare industry, we got very close to the customer. We saw drug shortages, we saw hospitals filling up. And I think that really opened up our eyes as a supply chain team, and I look over customer service as well. Really got a passion for the business and a passion for what we're doing. But the other thing it did was, we had to start working with marketing extremely closely because now there are all these shortages. Customers were a lot more demanding, coming back to us trying to find out what is happening. So marketing got extremely involved with that. And, when times are good, you don't have to collaborate nearly as much, but we had to. So we built tools that just increased transparency to data, to supply pipelines, so that they could sort of quickly and accurately give information to the customers. And I think Fresenius as a group did a very, very, very good job. And we hear it quite often from our customers saying, listen, things were not good. And you weren't afraid to say that things were not good, but you always had the information and you'd be transparent. You'd update us as fast as you could. So it really strengthened the company. And I think cross-functional collaboration got us through.
There's some great examples there, and you so often hear about, well, in fact, I've been involved in that myself in companies I've advised or been working in, where, you know, marketing launched some massive promotion, and like the first that supply chain know about it is when there's some massive spike in orders, and that internal communication as well as the external. So it's a very, very valid point. Professor Mamoun, what are your thoughts on supplier customer relationships and where they're going?
You know, what they said already, they're saying from their experience, from the practical application. But when we are working in the industry as a consultant, we notice this one. Even nowadays, you know, the customers are part of the whole supply chain. That means customer feedback should be involved in the every end, like supplier end, the factory end, like retailing end, everywhere. So there is a mechanism that nowadays they like to apply the modern supply chain, the customer feedback. So now, if you are thinking this way, when you think the supplier and the factory is like their customers. So they like to get their opinion about the raw materials. Again, on the retailing end, when they are taking the product from the factory, they're also the factory, they like to confirm the retailing side. What is their perception from the customer they're getting? So they like to work on that. So it means that we are observing that very collaborative relationship with the customers, with the whole supply chain. And if you think about the internal customers, so like the employees and then their staff, so they also taking some part from their opinion as a feedback, because basically they're also the customers as well. So it is the very collaborative actions in the whole supply chain among all stakeholders within the modern supply chain. And another one thing that what already the Stephen and Miss Anna mentioned, that transparency. Nowadays, if you look very carefully, the data transparency is very important issue. So if you think about the 20 years before, 30 years before, that we could not think about the data, we could not think of this kind of data transparency. Nowadays, we like to share everything, the pricing issues and other things. Even some of the company, you know, they like to display the annual report in the website. There's a free access; they can see what happened in the last year or something like that. So it means that it is creating some of the trust with the customers. So that companies, including the suppliers, and they're trying to create some the trust among their all stakeholders by this kind of transparency supply chain management.
Thank you. I guess sort of picking up on that trust and sharing of information, I mean, how far can it go? Because I think companies are still very cagey about their costs, aren't they? You know, if you're Nestle supplying Tesco would love to know how much profit you're making on your products. You're never going to really share that. So I know, obviously you've come from that world a little bit. Do you think there's a limit to how much the sharing of information will go?
I would say something which will be very surprising. I think the companies are more inclined for transparency because of the reputational risk. If you think about Nestle, it started as with the baby infant formula, and now they are a machine. They are like a giant water, sweets. But in general, companies, they bear this reputational cost more than anything. So in order to feed the nation or to serve the client, they are very inclined to share information and integrate their systems and their processes with customers. I think there is, here in the UK, I can't generalize, but what I've witnessed in my 4 years of being head of supply chain, I've witnessed actually a lot of negotiation happening to convince the customers, the retailers, to reveal and to welcome the corporation systems and processes. So actually, unless there is a full trust, as the professor said, a full trust and a full understanding, we are here to serve our planet and our consumer. So we have a joint objective. Then let's work together beyond, with some limits, of course, but let's integrate something for the greater good, which is the consumer and the planet as well, because let's do not forget about the planet, carbon emission, waste reduction, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. And Stephen, I mean, I think you were talking about kind of internal and external customers and how
Yeah.
you shared information, including sharing the bad news that there's going to be a shortage and so on. Again, do you think there's a sort of limit to how far you can take that sharing?
I mean, I can't ever think that we would start sharing costs, but I will say, I mean, there's something surprising that I might say as well is I think we started working with our competitors a little more strategically than we have in the past. We used to be scared to share any data to anybody, and I think we've all opened up for many reasons. One, I think we can trust it a lot more, hopefully. Two, and I think and number two, it shows a sense of control. I think if you're willing to open up and provide this information, you'll have more trust from customers and other stakeholders. So I think if your business is running the right way and you're able to do it, it looks good. Like it looks good. It looks collaboration looks good. So you should be open to do that. But yeah, the competitors, it was interesting. I mean, as we were coming up or we foresaw some supply issues, in the past, I can, quite honestly say we would never reach out to a competitor necessarily to say, hey, listen, we're kind of struggling here. What does your supply look like? And you think you can pick it up. But, to get through COVID again, there's so much good. I think there's so much bad, but good that came out of COVID. And that's one of them. I think it brought the industry together in Canada to work a lot closer, both competitives, highly regulated Health Canada, sort of a national healthcare system. So Health Canada is much involved. There's only a few group purchase organizations that procure large volumes. So I think it really did bring everybody together, and we collectively worked through a lot of things. And data is, we had to open up your spreadsheets to the world a little bit as much as you could. Yeah, costs are always something. Anything proprietary, but I mean anything that you can. I think we're happy to share now.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really very interesting to hear how in Canada COVID sort of made the industry work together, competitors work together more. Professor Mamoun, is that something that you've seen evidence of again in your region? Do you think people are working more closely because of COVID?
Yep. That COVID creates lots of opportunity in addition to the lots of losses. This is one of the opportunity they created, that the collaboration and very closely monitoring relationship, which was not very available in the earlier time. Due to the COVID time and everybody when they're home, they like to do the purchasing through the online. So they change the the regular custom. Even Walmart, Tesco, they like to go to the home delivery service. So it's a very common phenomenon. So that's why nowadays, the most of the organization, already Ms. Anna mentioned the Nestle. So when you see the Nestle activities in our country in this region, we also surprised to notice, they like to promote this one nowadays, ESG metrics, like environmental. This everywhere they like to focus this issue, planet, the environmental issue. So they like to create the awareness and other some things. And then social, like the CSR, there are lots of CSR activities. The main reason is that if you look very carefully, customer attention, and they like to focus as a giant of the market, that they have some social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, CSR, they like to do lots of CSR activities. And then the governance, even the modern governance technique has been changed. The earlier it was a very predominating, and nowadays is the customer-driven governance. They like to see what the customer would like to say about the product, about how their opinion, and then they try to, maybe it's not possible to cope up all opinions, but they're also thinking about these issues, that the governance issue based on the customer feedback. So what I said that this is due to the COVID situation, it has been created now, this environment. Most of the organizations now, they're planning to go that level, the ESG metrics.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and absolutely, ESG is another really good example of that transparency that's now there, and really changing the way that everyone works together. Thank you. Let's move to the second point. I mean, before that, actually, there's quite a nice little quote there from Eshwar on the comments about saying that networking is your net worth. So it's the same in the supply chain. So that's a good comment, Eshwar, and we'll come back to the question about better connections later on. It's also worth actually mentioning, and it moves nicely on when we're looking at the second point, which is changing strategies, switching from a cost-focused supply chain to a customer-centric one. And actually, earlier on, when we were talking about food inflation, mentioned, should organizations, be baking in price increases? So that sort of relates to that whole cost thing. So Anna, kind of when it comes to, kind of having a cost-focused supply chain or a customer-centric one, is there something to be said for suppliers having much stronger indexes to the cost of their materials to sort of almost, I suppose, take away the negotiations a little bit?
I think it's the way you phrase it. Either you use cost efficiency or you use the removing waste. Mm-hmm. The language is really important because the cost also, as Stephen said, corporations are here to make profit in a sustainable manner. And this is important, in a sustainable manner. Because, and this is where we touch the ESGs, as the professor said. Sustainable manner comes with managing the risk, how the manufacturers, the retailers react to risk such as pandemic, collaborative. So the external factors are actually helping us as industries to work collaboratively, yeah. But also it's about how you remove costs, because corporations, in order to make profits, they need to continuously, and all the companies, I have my own company now, I need to be profitable. So how can I run my activity with less cost? How can I remove? So I think it's important for, especially in the food industry, you need to remove what's unnecessary for the consumer. I can give you an example. The big cereal box, it was really big. 80% was full with product. So 20% was just air. The company analyzed this and they said, wow, it's such a loss in packaging. Packaging is driving the cost. So they said, wow, okay, so if the 20% of the box of the cereal is full of air, let's make the box smaller. So this is, and that's why it's not cost cutting. I'm very passionate about negotiations. I'm a procurement expert. So I think it's how we remove waste, how we make things smarter, and how we make the products more efficient by removing waste, such as, greener packaging, less packaging, different type of packaging.
It's a great example. And of course, in that example, it's not only a waste of packaging, it's a waste of space on vehicles. Your transport costs are higher and that adds to emissions, and it takes more space on the shelf, which might be what the brand wants because it's more prominent on the shelf. But you're absolutely right. And for the consumer, well, it takes up less space in their cupboard. So actually, if you can think more widely, there's lots of opportunities for sure. Stephen, what are your thoughts on this sort of customer-centric versus cost-focus? I mean, if it's too customer-centric, doesn't that just mean it's too expensive? If you promise that you'll deliver a single unit next day, regardless, in Canada, it's going to cost a fortune if you're that customer-centric.
Yeah, it's certainly a balance. Similar to the cereal, we saw, and the good thing again, when challenge arises, I think challenge drives innovation. And one thing similar to Anna Maria, your point, we noticed we always kind of knew this, but it didn't really come to light. But in the containers, we ship sort of 1 pallet height in containers. So there was a huge amount of space, wasted space in each container that we would bring from Europe or from India, for instance. So a lot of the manufacturers reconfigured pallets, and we couldn't double stack them because there's too much weight on, and we have glass vials and some other fragile ones. We couldn't necessarily double stack, but we could build 20%, 30%, 40% higher on the same pallet. So there were a lot of sort of shipping trials that we did and increased the capacity of a container. So yeah, again, something that drove that. But on the customer centric side, so I think one thing that we've begun to do is look at our inventory levels. And yeah, networking capital is a critical aspect to any business, but we did realize, some products are more critical than others. And again, one way the industry came together in Canada is we highlighted very critical products that would be used in whether it be a pandemic or any other critical situation in the healthcare industry. What are those really critical drugs? And we looked at those specifically to see how we can ensure that we can carry a little bit extra so we can react to anything that happens in the future. And we also, as they started to trust the numbers a little bit more. I mean, there's different ways you can calculate safety stock levels or levels of inventory that you wanted to hold, and there's very rudimentary, 2-month, 3-month, or there's some pretty sophisticated calculations where you can input coefficients of risk and customer service levels. And this sort of pushed us to use those more sophisticated models, and it did show us what products were overstocking, which products were understocking. And ultimately, we are holding a little bit more inventory now, but we're seeing the results. Like, we're keeping overall customers happy on those critical products where it raises the most flags. So working with customers to understand, critical products and how we can better serve on those products.
Okay, those are really interesting examples, Stephen, and I think it's so interesting that even in really established sort of sectors, there's so many opportunities which you think kind of, why didn't people look at them before? But it's great.
Oh, it's so true, and some simple things too. Like I said about just stacking the pallets a little bit higher. You just things you don't ever have to think about until you have to think about them. So that's interesting.
And I guess, maybe there's a background there. There's always a bit of a sort of a perception that pharmaceuticals, medical sector is got such large margins that they kind of like, save a bit of transport cost, who cares? But I guess, when times are tough and when environmental impact matters more and more, then some of these what used to be lesser issues become more important, which is great that it's driving those better efficiencies. Professor Mamoon, I mean, your thoughts on this balance of customer-centric versus cost-focused?
Yes, I'd like to start from the Miss Anna, what she said, that the owner, as an owner point of view, that we could not reduce the profit, right? Without the profit, how we can continue the business? So this is very vital issues. But come to the question is that customers, their focusing point, but they do not want to go for the loss. So how they can manage? So then we have to start with a new policy. So how they can create that attention for the customer. Ms. Anna already mentioned the one example, and Mr. Stephen also mentioned another one. I like to add another real example. Recently, we noticed that suppose that due to the price increasing due to the inflation, suppose 1 kilogram beef price is that around suppose the $10 to $12, say. And now some people, particularly the poor people, they do not want to go to this kind of beef, 1 kilogram beef. So now what is their strategy of suppose the retailer strategy? They now reduce the half kilogram beef or the 250 kilogram beef. So there's small packaging, and then customer they can purchase now. Suppose they can think. But the meaning is that the same meaning what Ms. Anna said. So this is a customer-centric decision. Maybe reduce the cost, but it's not the reduce the cost particularly. It is with respect to quantity that reduce the cost. But now is customer friendly. And another one thing, that when you think the customer, then they're always using the concept. If you look very carefully, recently I visited the Singapore, I noticed this one. Everywhere they try to focus on one thing, reduce, reuse, recycle. So that is a very environment thinking, and they try to get the attention from the customers. Even earlier, the water bottle, now they change the shape of the water bottle, and then they like to reduce the cost for that one. So what I said, that cost is a factor. They keep in mind, at the same time, their concentration belongs to the customer. So that is the one kind of modern business strategy, how they can create that environment between the customer center and their supply chain.
Thank you. So some great examples there of how customer-centric can indeed, not change costs or can indeed even reduce costs. And actually, Eshwar has shared a really interesting example, thank you, Eshwar, about working with HP partners to produce much higher yield ink cartridges. And I'm sure we've all changed our ink cartridges in our printers. And you think, God, this great chunk of plastic with a tiny drop of ink inside. And so that idea of getting more ink in the same cartridge is good for the customer and good for the environment and probably good for the manufacturer too. So a nice example there. Thank you. Let's move on now to the third point, which is slightly different, which is developing your supply chain network with specialist service providers. So I guess the interesting thing is if you're talking about specialist services, I guess the first decision is, what do you outsource? When do you decide, I'll give this to a service provider, I won't try and do it myself? Anna, back to you. What are your thoughts on that really key decision on when to outsource something?
And this is when the cross-functional team comes together, because it's a cross-functional team decision in a company to see, okay, it's better to outsource our logistic, or maybe to react in a more agile way and to build in business contingency. Maybe we need to have an in-house fleet with our own trucks, with our own drivers, to cancel out the shortage of staff. So I think the strategy, what I did in my previous job, I came up with, in collaboration with procurement, with work on where we should drive that, remove waste and optimize our reactivity to risk. And reactivity to risk, especially when the risk becomes a norm in this current environment we are all living in, it's so important to have a clear strategy. Okay, some companies, and I can talk about Nestle, they have their own fleet of trucks in order to be agile and actually counteract that shortage of drivers. This is one. But also, so in-house, actually building in-house capability. And outsourcing, what's worth outsourcing? Where actually a manufacturer, I can imagine Steve can build up on that. But you need to outsource where you don't have a capability and you don't want to build up, cost. Why would a corporation want to build up their own 100% fleet when there are so many amazing, cost-efficient logistic providers? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great example. So Stephen, yeah, for you, I mean, have you made some interesting decisions whether to outsource or indeed to say, no, we can do this ourselves. We don't need a specialist provider anymore.
Yeah, so I think coming into a lot of this, we were very good at knowing our strength, and we did outsource a lot. So we heavily utilized 3PLs, so third-party logistics. We have freight forwarders, customs agents that do a lot of that work for us. But two things we did. One, and this relates to transportation. One, we didn't have great visibility into the transportation. So we knew something was on the sea and we had an ETA, and that ETA would be not, multiple weeks inaccurate, which again, when times are good, doesn't really matter. You might be sitting on a few months of inventory, that doesn't matter. But when everything's so tight, 2 weeks is a big deal. So we worked with, there's a company, a little shout out to Transvoyant is a company that we started working with, and they're a company that amalgamates all types of data, no matter who you're shipping with, what shipping line, and they give you a nice clear dashboard. You can follow your ship across the sea, and they had some, using algorithms, very accurate estimated times of arrival, and ones that you could trust. And they had, things like temperature control is big for us, so we could. We didn't get there, but they had the ability to show temperature, so you knew if something was out of temperature range, you could start preparing what you're going to do prior to it landing. So we did utilize, something, a specialist in that area. But in you said risk, Anna, and I think that's what it made us do. We really looked at our risk and our critical suppliers, and we used to look at them based on spend for the most part. You kind of rank them by spend, and you say, we're closer with the guys you spend more with. But what we realized was it's not necessarily that all the time. So an instance, our customs broker, which, in terms of value, we don't do a ton of business with. However, they're just, one issue away, one strike away of really making our business not run if we can't get freight imported. So really working with, I think, a broader spectrum of suppliers and supplier management. And I know I got sort of shut down a little bit I was on this last panel about sending Christmas cards out. But I think what I really meant by that was, staying in touch with the key suppliers. And I think, generally, customers, you don't usually get any type of a special thank you from a customer. So it's nice to be able to do that downstream, whether it's a manufacturer, a freight forward, whatever, to say thank you, and let them know that they're they play a key role in your business and helping it to run. I think it's nice to hear, and I think it does have a positive effect on how they serve you.
Absolutely, some great insights there. Thank you, Professor Mamoon. I mean, again, your thoughts on that decision of when do you outsource and use a specialist provider versus not?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, when you say that, particularly this kind of term like the specialist service providers, so you have to think the third-party logistics, we have to think about the freight forwarding, we have to think of the suppliers, we have to think the warehousing, we have to think of the transportation, and maybe there is the multimodal transportation. Then we have to think about the temperature control. We have to the vehicle tracking system. So we need that kind of networking, so that at least we have to ensure this kind of good relationship. What the Mr. Stevens said, I totally agree. We have to create this environment. At least we have to give this thanks, maybe through the email, or maybe through the message, the WhatsApp message, or maybe the email, our phone, mobile phone. It is a create some the bonding and the collaboration will be starting this way. So that's we need the strong bonding, strong collaboration among all stakeholders of all the supply chain management, and particularly definitely the service providers. This kind of service provider service very critical. I would say that very critical as well as significant. So we have to start to think how we can make sure that good collaboration. They have to create this environment so that everybody will think that they are also part of the whole supply chain management.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard some great examples there actually of how to build a better connection. It's the thank yous, it may be a Christmas card or whatever. So let's just finish off because we're sort of almost at the end of our time. Anna, what would be your advice on that key topic in the heading of the whole session, of the whole episode today, how to build a better connection? What would be some of your advice to people?
I think the best would be if you work in a company where you are part of supply chain and you have a customer relationship department, just work collaboratively more than ever to mitigate the risk and to deliver availability, customer, fill rate, all your KPIs. But more than anything, think about we are all consumers. We all want each other's products. So I think collaboration is required to ensure at least 98% customer satisfaction.
Great, thank you. Stephen, you gave us some really nice examples. Any other bits of advice there on specifically building that better connection?
Yeah, I mean, last point, I don't know if I got to this, but just, bringing the customer closer to the supply chain. Like I said, a lot of us work behind desks all day and we push a lot of buttons. We don't necessarily see how that affects our customers and how they use our products. So taking an extra effort to bring that customer closer. We've done a lot with sort of customer testimonials, or there was a really great video of in our US manufacturing sites where we have employees that were actually patients as well. And show this video, and I'll tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in the room after this sort of just 6-minute video. So I think, bringing it closer to home, bring some passion to the work, and it's a better workplace.
Yeah, great example. And Professor Mamoon, finally,
we have to think that customer is the basically the all in all in the whole supply chain. So whatever we are doing, our main ultimate target the customer, consumer, and so you have to focus that one. We have to show our willingness. We have to show our greetings. We have to show our appreciation towards the customer, so that the customer will come forward, and that is the way how we can go to the sustainable business development. So without the customer-centered decision, we cannot come up with any kind of sustainable business development. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, always keeping that customer in mind is so important. Great. Well, thank you very much for those contributions. We are kind of really out of time now. As usual, I must select who has contributed some really good comments and so on. So yet again, actually, it's going to be Eshwar to win the Supply Chain Talk mug. You must be building up quite a collection of them, I think, Eshwar. So you may have to build an extension soon, I think. But thank you for those comments and some really interesting examples you shared with us as well. The next episode of Supply Chain Talk is next Wednesday, 5th of April. at the same time, 4 p.m. And this time we're focusing on improving your supply chain with digitalization. So a very relevant subject that I'm sure we're all looking at the moment. So finally, thank you again to my 3 guests today: Anna Maria Velika, founder of Green Apples Korea; Stephen Kravik, Director, Supply Chain and Customer Service at Fresenius Kabi, Canada; and finally, Professor Mamoun Habib, who's a professor at many universities. I can't list all of them. But thank you, all of you. Thank you for listening, and hope you'll join us next week.